Senator Rennick.
Yeah, hi guys, how you going?
Good, Senator.
Yeah, good. Mr Mayfield, maybe my questions, or Mr Graham, might be for you. I'm just trying to track where we're going in terms of costs to get to 82% of renewables in the grid by 2030. Have we got what's the latest forecast for the cost of getting the grid to 82% renewables?
So just to make sure we understand the question correctly, Senator. So when you say the cost of getting to 82%, are you talking about a scenario?
Well, isn't that Labor's target to get to the grid to be 82% of renewables by 2030?
So I believe that's a policy, but in terms of the sort of work that CSIRO's done, so if you're referring to GenCost, GenCost looks at capital costs for different technologies. It looks at levelised cost of electricity. It's not necessarily looking at pathways to certain percentages of particular energy types or generation types.
Okay, sure. So, Mr Graham, haven't you done a couple of estimates to get to net zero overall? One was originally $1 trillion, and it came back to $500 billion to get to net zero.
Paul Graham, Chief Economist for CSIRO Energy Business Unit. We've done a number of modelling exercises over the years where you can calculate the total new investment to get to different emission targets in the electricity sector. None of the numbers mean anything out of context. The context depends on how much electricity do you need. So, for example, you could have an extremely expensive scenario which is to do with electrifying huge parts of industry, and that could look like a really expensive scenario, but it's actually not necessarily expensive on a unit cost basis. Equally, you could have a $1 trillion scenario where you've electrified a lot of sectors, and then you could have one that's only $500 million to get to net zero, but that could just be that you've got lower electricity demand. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily, on a unit cost basis, lower cost or high cost. So none of these numbers about the investment cost over time mean anything without context.
Okay, so the context is that both major parties have committed to getting to net zero by 2050. What does the CSIRO forecast the capital cost will be to reach that target?
Senator, to answer a question like that, we'd need a lot more information about the underlying assumptions of that scenario. So what's happening globally? How else are we treating emission abatement in other sectors of the economy, which might affect the amount of electricity demand? So I can't answer.
Okay, and that's a fair point, but I guess the headline slogan that people get is that we're going to get to net zero by 2050. So I would have thought that we owe them, a detailed estimate of the cost to get there by 2050, and all those assumptions, obviously someone along the line has advised Prime Minister Morrison, or former Prime Minister Morrison, back in 2021, I think it was, when he signed it up to net zero, what the implications would be by signing up to net zero. So surely by now, this is a couple of years old, this agreement, we've sat down and worked out what assumptions, what's going to have to happen in order to reach net zero, and someone somewhere has had to model those costs, including the CapEx costs of, getting the grid and whatever else.
So, Senator, I believe there's a range of different exercises that are looked at that, but they're not electricity system only.
No, except
they're much bigger analyses, and they're viewed as pathways based on various scenarios. So there's some of that work.
But you're the scientist, and you also do the CapEx costing. What are the pathways? So would you want to explain to the Australian taxpayer what exactly, and the Australian energy consumer, what are the pathways, what sacrifices are they going to have to make to get to net zero by 2050?
And you'd be aware of some of the recent work around sectoral plans that the CCA has been working on and things like that. So it's that sort of analysis. It finds a pathway to get the emissions down, not necessarily fully costed at the stage. There's the economic analysis that goes with it as well. That's not CSIRO on its own. That's a range of groups.
I don't think that's a question that CSIRO can answer in isolation. I think there are a number of policy issues that those costings would be dependent on. We're not in a position to make those calls, and nor are we in a position to do that work alone.
No, that's fair
So
enough. but
I
that's
feel
what
like
I'm
it's not a
asking you.
question we can really answer, Senator.
But, well, I would have thought you could answer a large part of that because through the CapEx and the actual science.
Authorised G. Rennick People First Chermside.